Welcome to The Complete Works, an official podcast of FilmBook. The Complete Works is a podcast that delves film by film into the filmography of a Hollywood actor, director, writer, or composer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Complete Works podcast, a film podcast brought to you by FilmBook. My name is Doug Hess. If you're tuning in to Complete Works podcast for the first time, what I do on this podcast is discuss a specific movie from a film actor, actress, director, composers, film career, and currently I'm working my way through Tom Cruise's career. And in this episode of the Complete Works podcast, I'll be discussing his film Legend from 1985. You can find more information about the Complete Works podcast by simply going to FilmBook, that's film-book.com, or by searching the term The Complete Works. If you listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or perhaps another podcast service, please rate and review this episode. If you're listening to the podcast on YouTube, please like our video, subscribe, and consider becoming one of our patrons at patreon.com/FilmBook. Your support helps us to create more engaging content. And as I mentioned, we are going to be looking at the film Legend from 1985. It was released on April the 18th. It runs for approximately an hour and 34 minutes. And some of the filming locations was Silver Spring in Florida. And the production companies, Legend Production Company and Embassy International Pictures. So a little background on the film. And before we jump in talking about the film, what I'd like to do is just kind of run down the storyline, if you will, of Legend. So it's a mystical force bathed in sunlight, and the fate of creation hangs in the balance. Only when the sinister forces of evil have slain the last unicorn on earth will the wicked lord of darkness have the power to cast the world into endless night or darkness. With this horrible presence, this land really is focused on the pure-hearted forest dweller of Jack and his beloved princess Lily to undertake an impossible quest. Together they must defy the abyss and restore harmony within the universe. But as they soon realize, the struggle between light and darkness demands sacrifice. And so the question becomes, can two valiant mortals overturn the dark plans and reestablish the eternal balance to this cosmos? So that's just a quick, maybe a minute overview of Legend from 1985. One of the things I wanted to start off by saying this, in terms of this film, this is perhaps, in my personal opinion, one of the worst films that Tom Cruise made. I'll be honest with you, I struggled to watch this film from start to finish. Like I said, it was only about an hour and a half, and that was an hour and a half too long for me when it came to this this film. I had a lot of problems with this, and maybe it's because of so much recent, and I say recent, maybe that's kind of a strong word, but there just seems to be a lot of fictional fantasy type of movies that are out there, and to me this bombed. I'm not gonna lie, it was really tough for me to spend an hour and a half watching this film. I couldn't get into it at all. Yes, this is a very early film of Tom Cruise that was in it, but to me it was just it was just tough. I mean, when you have movies like Star Wars, when I think of fantasy, or The Lord of the Rings, those are films that I could get into and I could watch. Dune is another one that kind of comes to mind. Unfortunately, this doesn't work. This became from a pretty high budget. We'll talk a little bit later about the budget in there, but from 1985, it really had a very high budget to work with. Special effects came from Ridley Scott, who was the director from Alien, which is another film that, fantasy sci-fi that I thought worked, and it was great. But in this one, even though Tom Cruise is in here, I really struggled with this. Why did I struggle with this? Let me tell you, this really, I'm even having a hard time putting it into words of just how much I didn't care for the movie. So let me say that it's, to some degree, this is really a fairy tale. I mean, when we talk about the last unicorn being slain on Earth, and that's going to have complete darkness, to me, that's kind of a fairy tale. It had a tone that was kind of light in the tone and in the way the movie was being delivered. Again, bleak fates facing the heroes, is another thing that I kind of wrote down. It's too dreary and too gloomy to make this film work. And so, as much as I struggle to watch the darn thing, I'm even having trouble trying to tell you just how bad that I thought this film was. I mean, trying to get the right words to grasp just how big of a miss this film was. I'm even really struggling on with this. I think a lot of critics also would agree with me. This was not one of Tom Cruise's better performances, or just a film that I'm sure he kind of looks back on and go, that was kind of a miss. I understand that early in somebody's career, you don't have the luxury of being able to pick and choose what films that you're going to be in. Sometimes that, for lack of a better word, sometimes you're kind of forced into a particular film. Not saying that he was necessarily forced into it, but my point is sometimes you just don't have that luxury of being able to pick and choose what that you want into this. Some of the specific characters that's in the film. So I'm going to give you two. One we definitely want to talk about is Tom Cruise. So Tom Cruise is coming off of Risky Business. That's a film that I thought he did pretty well in. And then we come to this film. He's supposed to be the hero, and he is the hero whose mission is to conquer darkness, right? And to allow the sun to prevail. And so he has a young woman he meets, falls in love with, but she is lured into the underworld and seduced by the princess of darkness with this evil. So the question becomes, can Jack save Lily and also defeat darkness at the same time? Well, to me, it was just really a corny movie and setup in terms of that. Tom Cruise does fine in this, dealing with the material that he has to work with. So in that didn't really necessarily bother me in a sense, but it was just tough to watch. Now, Tim Curry is in this. Now, a lot of people will remember him from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. He actually does a pretty good job in being darkness or the evil side. He's believable. I liked his style. The problem was that he had so much makeup on that it was kind of hard to really see him as darkness. And I know that sounds kind of a little weird, but he gave a good performance. But it maybe a lot of this is just my disdain for the film that is overshadowing me and trying to give an honest view of the film and the performances. I enjoy Tim Curry, and again, I think he does a good job along with Tom Cruise of being good actors in here. It's just the film itself was just so unbelievable, and it was kind of that fairy tale and, trying to save unicorns and lightness versus darkness. It was really hard for me just to get into the film, and so I think I'm not giving it complete justice because of my bias on just how terrible of a film that this really was. So, does Tim Curry actually give a good performance? Yes. Could it be that any other actor could have been in that same performance, and it just happened to be Tim Curry's voice that we're hearing? Perhaps. You don't hear me say that very often because I think a lot of times it's hard to envision somebody else playing a character when they play it so good. And so I am stretching here and trying to give credit where credit is due. But I think in this case, just because of the film, I think a lot of other individuals could have played that part that Tim Curry did and still could have been believable and give a good performance. If I want to analyze this film against other films in the genre, it's hard not to think of something like Star Wars that I mentioned earlier, or Lord of the Rings. To me, The Princess Bride is another one that kind of comes to mind, or Alien. Those are much better films and even more believable than this. And so it's just hard to even want to talk about other films in the genre because this film is it's just not there. It's just really tough to talk about it. Even, something like Star Wars that is definitely fictional, it is so much better written and more believable with the good versus evil than Legends. I don't know what else to say about it in terms of that. Again, is the film good? No. Again, I don't want to overshadow the Tom Cruise and Tim Curry. I think they did good in terms of acting. They did as best they could based on the script that they were given and the storyline of this. It was just so far-fetched and such a fairy tale. And I don't know what else word I can say. This is a fairy tale. Actually, when I went to watch the film, it was almost hard to believe that Tom Cruise and Tim Curry would even be in this film. That's how bad I struggled with this film in terms of, is it good? No, I will give you my rating at the very end. But this was, again, I just can't stress enough how hard it was for me to even watch this. It was just so unrealistic that I just can't even put it into words. I've never struggled this much with a film to talk about as I do with this one, and that says a lot in terms of that. So yeah, if you're a Tom Cruise fan, personally, I think he's a great actor. This one completely misses the marks. It's a swing and a miss, which is kind of surprising. Because it had a budget of about $24 million. It grossed in the U.S. and Canada a little over about $15.5 million. Opening weekend in the U.S. and Canada was $4.2 million. It grossed worldwide just a little over $16.8 million. So it was not a success for the studio. When they poured in approximately $24.5 million and only came up with about 16.8, I think that that speaks volumes of the movie. And like I said, Tom Cruise is coming off of a few good movies there that he was starting to come into. Excuse me. With Risky Business, I thought he did a wonderful job on that, and then to follow up with Legends is kind of a it was a bomb. And I'm trying to be as nice as I can. Excuse me with the cough there. So let's jump into some trivia about this. So Tom Cruise reportedly wasn't happy with the American cut of this movie and wouldn't talk about it for years because of it. Wonder why. Something I just said a little earlier. He was very much encouraged fans to go with the director's cut. In the European release print, the face of the lead villain, Darkness, played by Tim Curry, can't be seen until 1 hour and 3 minutes in. That's more than 2/3 of the way through the film. So filming was interrupted twice. First by the studio burning to the ground, and secondly by the death of Tom Cruise's father. Understandable for both of those. Excuse me, folks. I have a little bit of a cold this week. Tim Curry had to wear a large bull-like structure atop his head with 3-foot fiberglass horns supported by a harness underneath the makeup. The horns strained the back of Curry's neck because they extended forward and could not stand up. That would be terrible. For scenes filmed in the forest, every line was dubbed in post-production as the noise on the set was too loud. Director Ridley Scott drew most of his inspiration from this movie from The Beauty and the Beast from 1946, as well as such Disney animated classics as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from 1937, Fantasia 1940, and Bambi 1942. You can tell. This was definitely, like I said, a fairy tale that just doesn't work. So Ridley Scott was inspired to cast Tim Curry as Darkness after seeing the Rocky Horror Picture Show from 1975. And I just want to say, I think Tim Curry is a fabulous actor. I think for whatever reason, he got hurt by the Rocky Horror Picture Show with his performance, which was a wonderful performance. I had nothing against that or the film. It's just I think a lot of people were a little bit gun shy with that. And I think that really kind of hurt his career, even though it's a cult favorite. I've seen it many times. I enjoy the show. I'm not talking negative about the show. I'm just trying to give you some my opinion on his career. But as a wonderful actor. The Sound of the Unicorns at Play is actually a recording of Humpback Whales. Ridley Scott wanted this movie to have an original screenplay because he felt that it was, quote, it was far too easier to design a story to fit the medium of cinema than to bend the media for an established story, end of quote. Jack's armor was made from flattened bottle caps. Kind of interesting there. Let's see here. Tim Curry's performance as Darkness was ranked by Entertainment Weekly as the best performance in a bad movie. I can agree with that. I think I kind of alluded to that just a little bit ago when I was talking about that. His performance was good. It was just the movie, and I think because it was such a bad movie, he doesn't necessarily get a lot of the credit for just how good he was because the film was just sucked, if I could just be so blunt in terms of that. At the time prior to filming, Tom Cruise was inclined to cut his hair. When cast for the part, his long locks were the perfect look for the forest-dwelling Jack. It is the longest length of Tom's natural hair actually captured in a film or a movie. At one point, Ridley Scott considered Mickey Rooney to play one of the major characters, but he did not look small enough next to Tom Cruise. Wiki title was originally Legend of Darkness. Initially, the quest was longer, but it was substantially reduced. Director Ridley Scott wanted to avoid too many subplots that departed from the main story and go for a more contemporary movement rather than getting bogged down into classical of a format. In the American cut, Darkness gives a speech of, in the beginning there was darkness, shows an opposing perspective to the introduction of the book of Genesis from the Bible. The themes, especially in the director's cut, parallel the book Paradise Lost by John Milton and focuses on Satan's perspective. Ridley Scott makes allusions to Christianity in many of his movies. Filming stopped when the 007 soundstage burned to the ground. The remainder of this was shot on a hastily constructed set. Jim Carrey, Johnny Depp, and Robert Downey Jr. were considered for the role of Jack. They're probably grateful that they didn't get cast in that. At one point, director Ridley Scott wanted to shoot the entire movie on 70 millimeter film stock, but it was deemed too expensive, so they decided not to. A couple other quick things here. Ridley Scott shot the famous Apple Mac 1984, which was in 83, waiting for the script to be written for this film during the fall of 1983. And just maybe one or two more. Johnny Depp was originally choice for the role of Jack, but the studio eventually decided not to cast him in the role as they wanted to search for more actors. And so, as you know, the rest is history. The studio eventually cast Tom Cruise, and Grace Jones actually visited the set in terms of that. So just a quick trivia of a legend in terms of that. Overall, this is probably, like I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being terrible, 10 being just perfect. I'm going to be nice and give this a 3. I originally was going to give this a 2, but I'm going to give it a 3. Just because the more I thought about it, Tom Cruise and Tim Curry really did do a good job in the film. It was just a terrible movie. As much as I would encourage you to go out and watch films, and obviously that's what we do, and something that we would encourage. I will encourage you to go out and watch this film just because that's what we do. But I will have to say, if you don't get to it and you have another film you want to watch prior to this, I wouldn't put this high on your list. And maybe somebody's out there that really enjoys these types of movies. And if you do, congratulations, good for you. Nothing against that, nothing wrong with that. But it was just something that's hard for me to... I probably, to be honest with you, won't watch it again. I'm just being completely honest. And it's just something that I did not... I'll be honest with you, I just didn't really enjoy. So... hopefully you will find some enjoyment out of it, and if you do, say go for it. But I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Complete Works Podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe for future episodes. You'll find FilmBook on all major social media networks, so give us a follow. You can find more of my work on FilmBook's official website, which is film-book.com. Just search for Doug Hess or The Complete Works. You can also find me on Twitter at HessDoug14 or Instagram at HessDoug14 as well. Tune in next time when I review and analyze the next Tom Cruise film. Thank you for listening. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to The Complete Works. Find more of The Complete Works on FilmBook, on your favorite podcast service, and on YouTube.